concerned about it. Part of it was disruptions from a very unique shock, namely the pandemic, which led to massive shifts in spending and supply restraints. Part of it was the amount of stimulus that led to labor market tightness and displacement. But I've long felt that it would be possible. It's mainly the job of the Fed, but the administration's done what it can to help, that it would be possible to bring inflation down in the context of a strong labor market. It's a so-called soft landing. And I believe we're seeing that. There are risks, of course, but I'm very hopeful. The labor market is strong. It's a little less hot than it was a year ago, which reduces some inflationary risk, but we've got solid job creation, and inflation has come down more than 5% off its highs. So fingers crossed, I think we're doing well.
Well, I and the audience agree with that. You know, it's always a problem in public policy, and you know this, you've been at the forefront of it. To make something good happen when something bad has occurred, 2008 being a prime example, takes time. And our political system is not set up to give people time. And so what you and the president and your teams have accomplished in a very short period is truly remarkable. And people are slowly feeling it, but there's always a drag, isn't there? There's always a drag of like, this is how it felt, and I'm not over it yet. And the pandemic was so psychologically displacing as well as economic. But the other thing you've done, which is so important, is you've coupled the recovery with the investments. And would you talk a little bit, because this audience is particularly concerned about investments in clean energy, investments to try to deal with climate change, investments in health and healthcare, infrastructure, all of which you now have addressed. So how does that fit into the sort of long-term strategy of growth that the Biden administration and you particularly are championing, that investing in America will move us forward exponentially in job creation, in quality of life, and in dealing with big problems like climate?
Well, thanks for that question. This has been an important Biden priority since day one. And he said we need to build back. He wanted to build back better. And he has urged doing so from the middle out and the bottom up. Traditionally, to promote stronger growth in the United States, what we've heard about is supply-side economics, or trickle-down. And that usually means giving big tax breaks or deregulation to rich individuals or to firms that are already doing well, with the hope that private investment will be stimulated and there'll be gains as a result for workers. And the truth is, it hasn't worked. It has worked to enrich the highest net worth and highest income individuals, but it hasn't worked for the economy. But what President Biden's approach is also to focus on the supply side of the economy, which is what matters to long-run growth and to income distribution and to the environment. But he's doing it in a way I've kind of dubbed modern supply-side economics. It is supply-side economics, but it's not the old-fashioned trickle-down stuff. First of all, it's not just about private investment. It is somewhat about private investment because, for example, the Semiconductor and Chips Act provides incentives that are creating huge investments in semiconductors. The Inflation Reduction Act has an enormous set of tax incentives that are stimulating massive investment in renewables, in clean energy, in electric vehicles, in batteries. So private investment is part of it, but we neglected infrastructure investment forever in this country. And now we're really rebuilding our infrastructure. We're investing in research and development again. I mean, our country used to be among the top performers in terms of government investment in R&D, and we fell way down the ladder globally. And now, you know, we are an economy that is investing meaningfully in R&D that drives growth. And we're investing in people and want to do more in terms of investing in people. That's important too, and it tends to facilitate a decline in inequality rather than an increase in it. And the environment is critically important. I mean, climate change is an existential problem. We've waited far too long to take it seriously in the United States, and it's been utterly a priority for the Biden administration. And the result is we've passed a trifecta of legislation, 3 very important acts: the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Chips and Semiconductors Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which are really supporting much faster growth and good job creation in the United States. During the Biden administration, we've had announced $500 billion of investment in manufacturing. And what's important, I think, is, you know, there are parts of the country that just have not enjoyed the same kind of growth that we've seen on the coasts. Some of America has enjoyed growth. Much of America has not. Jobs have disappeared. And what President Biden's approach is to try to reverse that. Of the investments that have been announced in clean energy, we've had over $120 billion of investment, clean energy investment, announced since the IRA was passed. It is concentrated in parts of the country with above average poverty rates and below average college enrollments and college completions. So, you know, the president feels, and I agree with him, you ought to be able to get a good job that you can support your family on, even if you don't have a college education. There is a high payoff to a college education, but we need to make sure that people who don't have a college education can do well too. And many of the good jobs that are being created through these investments are going to people who have had a shortage of opportunity and in parts of the country that haven't done well over the past decades. And so I think this is an important approach. It's addressing environmental issues. It will do it in a way that promotes less inequality and will promote long-term growth.
Well, the other thing that's so interesting to me about the CHIPS Act is that in the implementation, there has been preferences given to companies in order for them to access the billions of dollars that are intended to be an incentive to get back to advanced manufacturing in America. And some of those conditions are having childcare available. You know, having childcare in either on site or subsidizing your workers for childcare. And it's not just out of the goodness of the hearts of the policymakers, but we need to expand our workforce when it comes to advanced manufacturing, and that means including women. And if you're going to include women in advanced manufacturing, you're going to have to provide some access to quality, affordable childcare. So I'm excited about the trifecta, as you say, Janet, that was passed, and I see the evidence of it, you know, going up all over the country, and you know, new plants, you know, new clean energy products, obviously infrastructure. And this audience here at CGI, I hope those of you interested particularly in these areas will pay attention to that legislation, because there's a lot of incentives for the private sector to get more involved.
There are indeed. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'd like to maybe turn our discussion toward foreign policy.
Sure.
So one of the things the Biden administration and I have been most focused on, of course, is Russia's brutal war against Ukraine. Treasury has been involved in imposing a set of sanctions. We have export controls that are in place. We devised a sort of innovative price cap that's intended to deprive Russia of a significant share of the revenue it normally gets from selling oil on global markets while keeping the oil flowing so that we hold down global prices. I visited Kyiv. It is remarkable the courage, the bravery of the people, how much they obviously love their country, how much they're suffering and are willing to bear. We have historic military involvement, but we know that more needs to be done. And as a former Secretary of State, I'm very curious to hear your perspective on U.S. support for Ukraine, on the war, and I'd very much like to hear about CGI's important work in this area.
Well, first of all, Janet, I want to commend you and the Biden administration, particularly the president, for the strong stand that's been taken to support Ukraine. And that's been obviously with military supplies and equipment of all kinds, but also putting together the alliance, which was not in great shape when the president took office. There'd been a lot of damage done to all of our alliances, but particularly to NATO and our relationships in Europe. And rehabilitating that and getting it in a position where people are united on behalf of Ukraine and against Putin's Russia was a major success. And then, of course, the sanctions, which you mentioned, are really important, and there has been some effect of them, but there needs to be more. And that's something that has to be ratcheted up, I think, over the very near future. So, first of all, I think the heroism, the courage of the people of Ukraine and their leaders is just an extraordinary story that is so inspiring. It's horrible to think that they had to rise to this occasion because of the brutality of the invasion, but rise they did, defying the odds, not just the odds of what Putin had calculated, but really the odds everybody had calculated about whether or not they could withstand an invasion. So they deserve our support. I believe their fight is our fight. Their fight for freedom, for democracy, against a return to an old way of nations relating to one another, which is Putin's intent to try to change the boundaries of countries, to try to reestablish, the old imperial Russia, if not the Soviet Union. So we have to stay with the Ukrainians, and it is really important not